Good evening, and welcome to New Foundation Unity. This evening, we're beginning a series of 3 classes on the prophet Ezekiel. As some of you may have tuned in to my class on the prophets of ancient Israel, you will remember that there was no time to complete Ezekiel, and Ezekiel turns out to be perhaps the most dramatic of all the major prophets. As usual, if you have any technical questions, I've already talked to Mark this evening. He says that everything is on track, but if you're having technical difficulties, you can reach him at truthunity.net. And later on, I will take a break around 8 o'clock. The handouts are over here. I will take a break and invite you to call in to ask questions, hopefully, make comments, clear up anything that you do not understand. Also, I wanted to thank those of you who attended the week-long class on silent meditation and went on the retreat. There were 7 of us all together, and it was truly a pioneering experience for New Foundation Unity. I hope to do another one of those in the fall, perhaps around October, but I'll keep you posted. So as we begin our time together, I'd like to invite you to close your eyes and remember the one foundational truth, that there is but one power, one presence, one life, one mind, one source, and we are one with that one. To become one with that source is the purpose of our being here. And so, for a few moments in the silence, let us rest in that awareness that we are one with the infinite good of God in the silence. And now as we begin to return our attention to this time and this place, we give thanks for that awakening to the truth of who and what we truly are, the image, likeness of God, and our purpose for being here to bring it forth in a path of service. And for that awareness, we are truly grateful, and we do give thanks in the name and through the power of our master teacher, our way shower, Jesus Christ. Amen. So, Ezekiel, we're going to start talking about Ezekiel. I always like to remind you to use your metaphysical Bible dictionary. That helps a lot in understanding the character of the characters and what that actually represents within us. Ezekiel means, and I'll do this for you since I hope some of you have read Ezekiel.
I got to God strengthens.
All right.
And his father does not measure up.
Okay.
That's about as far as I go.
Okay, good. So Ezekiel means it's that part of consciousness that strengthens us in a time of extreme challenge. That's what Ezekiel means. He is the son of Buzi, and Buzi represents that part of us that discerns when we are not functioning up to the standard of the Christ. Remember that God does not condemn us. Ezekiel reminds us that we are able to discern from that state of consciousness when we have violated spiritual law, and that violation of spiritual law brings with it the consequences of that. So if I drop something and it happens to fall on me and cut me, that's not God punishing me. It is my violation of the law of gravity. Okay? If I stick my finger that has water on it into an electrical outlet and I get a huge shock, that is not God punishing me. So think of the exile, and Ezekiel was the prophet par excellence of the exile. Think of the exile that is the supreme challenge and the supreme consequence of trying to live in a state of separation from that one source. Okay. And yes, the exile was a period of history. 10,000 were brought from Israel to Babylon in 597, but in 586, roughly 10 years later, another batch was brought. Babylon had a very different policy with regard to the exiles, very different from Assyria. Assyria had swooped down some 200 years earlier, or 150 years earlier, and overtook the northern kingdom. And instead of keeping the captors in their own settlements, they integrated them into the whole society in Assyria. So the Jewish identity, if you will, got somewhat lost, and it became a mixed race. But in 586, and that's generally the date we ascribe to the exile, Babylonia came down, swooped over everything, overtook Judah, and took the cream of the crop back to Babylon. And they were not treated badly. They were not slaves. They were allowed to have a certain amount of freedom as to their own personal affairs. They could engage in business. They could worship as they pleased. And as a result, there remained a sense of identity amongst those captives. So what happened here was completely unique. Ezekiel's call to prophecy was comparable in its intensity and in its transformational quality to Paul on the road of Damascus. And do you remember what happened to Paul on the road of Damascus?
He was on his way to do
Yeah.
dreadful things, and
he had actually just finished doing dreadful things. He had just finished killing Stephen, the martyr, and others who were rebellious, you might say, of Jewish law. They were considered Christians, although they were not called Christians at that point. So he went from being a Christian killer to being an apostle. And the intensity of Ezekiel's calling was comparable to that. I have written some words on the board here, and I'm not sure that you'll be able to read them from your screen. And so I will tell you that the first notable thing about Ezekiel's calling was that it happened in Babylon. The others happened in Jerusalem. This was by the river Chebar, which represents a vital, renewing stream of thought, which was going to play a significant role in the return to Jerusalem. Okay. Also, an important piece of his calling involved a scroll. But I think before we talk about the scroll, we'll actually read, and this you will find in Ezekiel chapter 1, about his calling. So here's how it goes. There's this structure in the book that has a vision, and then an oracle, and it follows this pattern all the way through. The vision, and then the oracle. And the vision complete with consequences. Okay. All right, so in chapter 1, and this is also unique in that it reads like consistently from start to finish, with the exception of verses 2 and 3 in chapter 1, as a personal first-hand testimony. He tells you his name right away. He tells you the exact date when he was called, and all the way through, except for that one editorial comment, is his own firsthand testimony of his vision and the oracles. Okay, so chapter 1, starting with verse 4, and I hope that some of you remember the importance of numbers.
Foundation.
Yes, foundation. As I looked, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, and a great cloud with brightness round about it, and fire flashing forth continually. And in the midst of the fire, as it were gleaming, bronze. Okay, fire. In the Old Testament, fire always represents the presence of God. All right, so here is this great, radiant, fiery cloud. And from the midst of it came the likeness of 4 living creatures. These are the same 4 living creatures, for those of you who tuned in to Revelation, the same 4 living creatures. These are the 4 levels of being within us. We have the physical, we have the mental, we have the emotional, and we have the spiritual. So the 4 living creatures had the appearance of a man, but they had 4 faces. And so the face of the man was the face that faced forward. And on the left side, we had the lion, which represents courage and feeling and the emotional level. On the right side, we had the ox, the body, physical. And on the back, we had the eagle, which represents the spiritual. Now, did I say that wrong? The lion is on the right side and the ox is on the left side. Okay. In addition, it says, and this was their appearance, that they had the form of men, but each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. I found this drawing extremely helpful, and so for those of you who have access to this book, here is a picture of the 4 living creatures. I hold it up just so you get an idea of how dramatic this image is. And
I'd like to say what the name of the book.
Oh, Meet the Prophets, a beginner's guide to the books of the biblical prophets. And it's an excellent book. But this drawing is, I think, very helpful. Okay, so you've got that. They each have 4 wings, and 2 of those wings are outstretched like so, and the other 2 are covering their bodies. Their legs were straight. Okay, that means that when they moved, they went straight. There were no devious routes here, and the soles of their feet were like the sole of a calf's foot. Okay, so their understanding, all right, their understanding, the soles of the feet were like the soles of a calf's foot, a calf being a young cow. All right, so
It's unbroken hoof, too.
and it's an exactly, yes. and they sparkled like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their four sides, they had human hands. And the four had their faces and their wings thus. Their wings touched one another. They went every one straight forward without turning as they went. As for the likeness of the faces, each had a face of a man in front. The four had the face of a lion on the right side. The four had the face of an ox on the left side, and the four had the face of an eagle at the back. Okay, so you have a picture of these creatures. And such were their faces, and their wings were spread out above. Each creature had 2 wings, each of which touched the wing of another, while 2 covered their bodies. And each went straight forward. Wherever the Spirit would go, they went, without turning as they went. Now, we sometimes, in our pursuit of something, go about it in a somewhat circuitous way. Not so here, that wherever the Spirit went, they all went. So they were guided by Spirit. In the midst of the living creatures, there was something that looked like the burning coals of fire, like torches moving to and fro among the living creatures. Again, fire representing the presence of God. And the fire was bright, and out of the fire went forth lightning, and the living creatures darted to and fro like a flash of lightning. Okay, now here is an image that is so characteristic of Ezekiel, which is he saw a wheel, and there was a wheel within a wheel. Okay. In verse 15, now as I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel upon the earth beside the living creatures, one for each of the 4 of them. As for the appearance of the wheels and their construction, their appearance was like the gleaming of a chrysolite, and the 4 had the same likeness, their construction being, as it were, a wheel within a wheel. This is quite important, because what Ezekiel is saying is that within the cosmos, each individual, it's like the image likeness. Here is the great wheel. The wheel is a cosmic symbol. We talk about an astrological wheel, all right, that is divided by its spokes into the different signs. All right, 12 signs of the zodiac. All right, and then within that, a wheel, do we not have our own astrological chart? And each one, there is a balance of earth, air, fire, and water. All those elements are present in the big wheel as well as in the small wheel. And so these two interact with one another. They are inseparable. When they went in any of their 4 directions without turning as they went. The 4 wheels had rims, and they had spokes, and their rims were full of eyes round about. Okay, so wisdom, all-seeing wisdom, these wheels on the outside. This is about discernment. A prophet has to do with, the prophet is the mouthpiece of God. A prophet, in this case particularly, meeting with that supreme challenge of exile, draws on those deeper resources to discern the spiritual law and what has gone wrong. Where have I violated spiritual law, and what do I do about it? So exile, this is not just about this historical period. Exile is living in a sense of separation from that one source. It's not just characteristic of the Babylonian exile, it's characteristic of most people today, to differing degrees. Is it not true that we find ourselves on certain occasions forgetting that we are made in the image and likeness of God? We forget the truth that we are here to live, and we, like the Israelites, have foreign gods. And we find that perhaps it's money, perhaps it's power, perhaps it's social status, perhaps it's trying to please authorities, whatever. But that's called idolatry. And if we forget altogether, it's called apostasy. Those were the great sins of Israel, that they forgot about the one true God, and they wandered off amongst idols and worshiped the foreign gods, anything other than the power and presence of that God within us. Okay, and so the consequence for that is a limitation in our outward movements, right? We are captives of our own self-imposed limitations as a result of not staying in touch with the power and presence within us. Okay. This paragraph, starting with verse 20. Actually, it starts with verse 19, but then it says again, wherever the Spirit would go, they went, and the wheels rose along with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. When those went, these went, and when those stood, these stood, and when those rose from the earth, and the wheels rose along with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. So this is a way of describing that spiritual principle as above, so below. Okay? As in the macrocosm, so in the microcosm. As in mind, so in manifestation. The two are inseparable. These wheels, always moving together. Okay, now here is the sound of these living creatures when they moved. They sound the sound of many waters, like the thunder of the Almighty, a sound of tumult, like the sound of a host, and when they stood still, they let down their wings. Now, here are these wings that are outstretched above like this, and they are holding up a throne. All right. And on this throne, which is in the shape of a dome, sitting on the throne is the appearance of a man, and it's all bejeweled. There's a rainbow. I mean, this is definitely a spectacular vision. Above the firmament, over their heads, there was the likeness of a throne, in appearance like sapphire. And seated above the likeness of a throne was a likeness as if it were of a human form. And upward from what had the appearance of his loins, I saw as it were gleaming bronze, like the appearance of fire enclosed round about. And downward from what had the appearance of the loins, I saw as it were the appearance of fire, and there was brightness round about him, like the appearance of the bow, that's the rainbow, it is in the cloud on the day of rain, so was the appearance of brightness round about. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell upon my face, and I heard the voice of one speaking. All right, this is here again, like Paul on the road to Damascus. And you think, why? What is it about this vision that makes him fall on his face?
Or he could get dizzy if nothing else.
Well, one would say, well, it's just because it's a vision of God. But it's more than that, because it's an absolute turnaround in what he had always believed. He had always believed that a vision of God, Yahweh, that is, was only in Jerusalem. God lived in the temple in Jerusalem, and here he was in Babylon, and God apparently had taken up residence in Babylon, and he was to prophesy not just to the people of Israel, but to his fellow captives there in Babylon. Now, that was enough to put him in a coma for 7 days. Okay, because it was against the strictest belief system that he had. He and his father were both priests. They were amongst the elite in Jerusalem. And on the very day that he would have been ordained as a priest, he had this vision. Okay, so instead of being ordained as a priest, it turns out he is a prophet to the exiles. All right.
Well, and their captors.
Yeah. Okay, so that's all of chapter 1. Chapter 1 is this elaborate vision. And here, God is not, apparently, headquarters are not in Jerusalem. What is Jerusalem? That is, let's say, your peace of mind. All right. If you are not living in a sense of connection to the presence of God within you, you lose your peace of mind. And it seems like God has left you. But God has not left you. You have left the presence of God. So here in chapter 2, he receives his commission. And what a commission it is. All right. He is to go. The first thing that happens is, here he is on his face. And the word comes to him, get up. Stand upon your feet, and I will speak with you. You have to rise up in consciousness. You can't just be in this state of overwhelming prostration. Okay. And when he spoke to me, the Spirit entered into me and set me upon my feet. And I heard him speaking to me. And he said to me, Son of man. All right. When Jesus said, Son of man, he was referring to himself as a human being. All right. But as an illumined human being. Okay, so that's his favorite title. Throughout this whole book, he is referred to as a son of man. Okay. I send you to the people of Israel, to a nation of rebels. So first he's going to Israel, to these rebels who have rebelled against me, and their fathers have transgressed against me to this very day. And he says ever so many times that they are rude and they are stubborn. And you are to speak to them even though they are not going to listen. Gee, how does that feel? You know, here's your task, to speak to people who are not going to listen to you. And you shall say to them, Thus says the Lord God, and whether they hear or refuse to hear, for they are a rebellious house, they will know that there has been a prophet among them. And you, Son of Man, be not afraid of them, of their words, and so on. And you shall speak my words, whether they hear or refuse to hear, for they are a rebellious house. And he says to him further, and now I am still in chapter 2, verse 8, Open your mouth and eat what I give you. And when I looked, behold, a hand was stretched out to me, and lo, a written scroll was in it. And he spread it before me, and it had writing on the front and on the back, and there were written on it words of lamentation and mourning and woe. Now, again, I show you this picture because the whole center of this, here you see the hand, and this scroll takes up the whole length of the page. What is the significance of that scroll? If you recall, in the book of Jeremiah, I believe it's chapter 36, Jeremiah was told to write a scroll of all the sins of Israel. And he was told to show it to the king, this king that is now Jehoiakim, who is now currently in Babylon with the rest of them. And of course, a king always represents will. And this king was very rebellious. So he read, Jeremiah read this scroll that he had written to the king, and the king, arrogant and rude as he was, cut up the scroll, cut it all up and burned it. And Jeremiah almost lost his life. Now, the reason that this plays such a prominent role here, or at least some think this, that this guy, Ezekiel, who was one of these elite, was one of these priests, and there was no way he could not have been present at that time, and was most likely one of Jeremiah's persecutors. So here he has to eat the scroll, eating, appropriating, taking in full measure all these lamentations. And before he eats it, it's rolled out in front of him so he can see on both the front and the back. It is completely covered with dirges and woe and lamentation. So he eats it, and he says, and it was sweet as honey. To the one who is dedicated to God, even the greatest challenge, the greatest woes are sweet. Very interesting. So it's almost like a karmic return to Ezekiel for having been part of the persecution of Jeremiah, who was his contemporary. But Jeremiah was quite bold. And anyway, it's an interesting piece. So falling to the ground and having Yahweh reveal himself over in the skies over Babylon, making Ezekiel a prophet not only to the people of Israel, but to his own captives. He is commissioned to speak to them, whether they will listen or not. So he's really given a difficult task. Are we also commissioned to speak truth, whether people listen or not? Yes.
And then there's dusting off your feet.
Well, there's no coercion in spirituality, so you can't force people to listen to you, and you shouldn't proselytize. That's definitely not a part of unity. To try
speaking your truth.
But speaking your truth is always the right thing to do. But back in the days of Jeremiah, which was not too far in the past, they didn't want to hear that, and so they were rude, and they just destroyed the scroll. They would not listen. So now he gets to speak to these same people, knowing that they may very well not listen either. Yes, but the commission is always the same. We are here to manifest God's presence in whatever path of service we have chosen. We are here to speak truth, to have the courage to speak truth, and to know that the truth, whether or not people listen, it is what they need to hear, and at least have that seed planted. Okay. In other words, we don't dumb things down. We don't water things down to appeal to the status quo. Okay, so you get the situation here. Okay. prior to this, and what the scroll says is that Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. This is like no prophet before has said that Jerusalem, it was always that Jerusalem would be restored. But now Jerusalem is actually going to be destroyed. And this was entirely against what everything that Ezekiel had previously believed, that Jerusalem was not indestructible. Don't we lose our peace of mind? Is peace of mind indestructible? Well, if it's like totally established and we're connected in to that sense of power and presence, yes. But we lose our peace of mind over trivial things sometimes. Okay. Well, so Jerusalem is not indestructible. And the interesting thing is that Ezekiel's interpretation is that the captives have been given a refuge. They have actually been saved from destruction by being sent into captivity. This is that sometimes, even though something seems difficult and is so challenging and you're not sure you can get through it, boy, just another perspective, and you say, what a blessing. I have been spared this fate. Okay, so Babylon went from being a place of, exile and doom and gloom to a place where, difficult as it was the light of hope, because they were going to be the ones that returned to Jerusalem, bringing new light and restoring Jerusalem to its rightful place. Okay, so here's his commission. He has an unusual commission. And you find this in your handouts. And by the way, those of you out there in cyberspace, on my website, newfoundationunity.org /newsletter, you have to go to newsletter, and then there's a folder of handouts on Ezekiel. And so you will find the Bible verses, chapters, where all this, where each event is happening. So first, after he eats the scroll, then he sees what's going on in Israel, and then he's shown what goes on in Babylon. And saw that the hand of the Lord was upon him, and he came to the exiles who dwelt by the river Chebar, and I sat there overwhelmed amongst them for 7 days. Okay, what's overwhelming? Jerusalem is not indestructible, and that these captives here in Babylon are where the salvation of Israel lies. Very interesting. So that's how, I think there's a correlation between the rigidity of a belief system and how hard hit we are with the transformation when we awaken to a new perspective. And just like Paul, who was blinded for several days and had to be led to the street called straight, And here he is, overwhelmed for 7 days, however long it takes for that to fully integrate into his being. All right, now here is the rest of the commission. He is given the role of watchman. He is the watchman for this community. That salvation lies not in saving Israel, but in the internal renewal of the individuals within this community in Babylon. This is a novel idea that we have not seen in any other prophecy. And so he's on the lookout of warning them, showing them, guiding them, speaking as he is told to speak. Okay, and so here are the words, and this is in chapter 3. This is so interesting because the prophet has the responsibility to speak truth. If you speak truth and the people don't listen, you have done your duty, and at least you are not destroyed. If the people don't follow you, that's their responsibility. If you do not warn them and they do not survive, you, the prophet, are also responsible for that. Okay, so your utmost responsibility is to speak truth as it is given to you, exactly as it is given to you. Okay. You find this in chapter 3, all the way up to verse 22. And he repeats it, starting with verse 20. If a righteous man turns from his righteousness and commits iniquity, and I lay a stumbling block before him, he shall die. Because you have not warned him, he shall die for his sin, and his righteous deeds, which he has done, shall not be remembered. But his blood I will require at your hand. Nevertheless, if you warn the righteous man not to sin, and he does not sin, he shall surely live, because he took warning, and you will have saved your life. So it puts a heavier responsibility upon the prophet, even than upon the individual. It's like the prophet in you. If you say, I see where I have done wrong, but I'm going to keep on doing what I want to do, all right, that's worse. It's just like if you break the law out of ignorance, you still receive consequences. But if you're a lawyer and you break the law, you should know better. And so the consequence is heavier because you have a wider influence over people. All right, so he is the watchman in this community, and he's trying to keep them righteous. And as it turns out, as we will find in later verses, that on the way back to Jerusalem, any wicked ones are purged from the group. So this is a community that is being groomed to return, to restore Israel to a state of purity, restore Jerusalem to a state of purity. Now, here's what they do. Because they're in these communities that are just Jews, and here again you see the priestly influence here, they institute they reinstitute some of the Jewish traditions. They eat together, so they don't ever eat with the Babylonians, and so they have these kosher laws. This is where all the priestly writings come from. It's from this time. They also, in addition to the laws about eating, they have other, let's see. Oh, and he has to, he has to stay inside. He's not allowed to go out. He's all bound up in cords. This is quite funny.
Where are you?
I'm still in this where he's receiving his commission.
Oh.
Okay, I mean, this is chapter 3. He's receiving his commission. Okay, where he's saying, I'm going to be watching and I'm going to be warning you. And they're doing these things that are particularly Jewish customs to keep the people together and pure, because that's all they need to do. And then he's told that go shut yourself within your house. Okay, house represents consciousness. And you, O Son of Man, behold, cords will be placed upon you, and you shall be bound with them, so that you cannot go out among the people. And I will make your tongue cleave to the roof of your mouth, so that you shall be dumb and unable to reprove them, for they are a rebellious house. But when I speak to you, I will open your mouth, and you shall say to them, Thus says the Lord God, He that will hear, let him hear. And he that will refuse to hear, let him refuse, for they are a rebellious house. When you are consecrated to God, you are bound to obey. It's like a covenant. It's totally binding. And because he has agreed, he's had this calling, he has agreed to this covenant, and he is literally bound to speak only when he is told to speak, and he's not to go out and mingle with the people. So he is being, again, groomed so that he can help shape this new community. You know, they're building a new foundation here. And so there are other things they do besides just eat by themselves. They have their own worship services as well. But, the Sabbath, that's the other thing. They institute the Sabbath, doing these things that keep them set apart from the Babylonian culture, unlike the Jews that got integrated into Assyrian culture, like the woman at the well. Okay? Now, Ezekiel, let's see, how are we doing on time? Oh, it's 8:00. But I'll just tell you this one thing, that Ezekiel is a teacher who teaches by example. And he goes through these elaborate pantomimes of acting out. And so the first thing that he acts out is the siege of Jerusalem. So he calls for a piece of clay, and on the clay he scratches a map, if you will, of Jerusalem. And then he digs, then there's a little trench, he digs around it, and then there are these weapons, battering rams, and it looks like the whole place is in siege, so that the people get a visual of what is happening to Jerusalem. And then he is told to take an iron plate and place it as an iron wall between you and the city. He being God's representative and the city. So here's this iron wall between them. And your face toward it, and let it be in a state of siege, and press the siege against it. This is a sign for the house of Israel. Okay, now, here's the symbol for the punishment. He is to lie down upon his left side, and I will lay, this is God speaking, and I will lay the punishment of the house of Israel upon you for the number of the days, that you lie upon it, you shall bear their punishment. For I assign to you 390 days. Now, 390 days has nothing to do with their time of captivity in Babylon. They were only there for 50 years. All right. So, we need to look more carefully at that number, 390 days. And I think that for Israel to be fully restored, we have to have the Trinity active on all three levels of our being and attuned to the presence of God. So 390. And then he's to turn over on his right side for 40 days. This is the punishment he has to take on for Judah. 40 days. Now, 40, we know that's a familiar one for however long it takes to have the courage to meet things with spiritual truth. Okay, so 390. This is for Israel. The 40 is for Judah. Okay. Judah, the symbol of Judah is the lion. There's a standard of the Lion of Judah. Okay. So that's his punishment. Anytime now, you're welcome to call in 816-301-6304.
I'm getting stuck on 390 being 12.
3 and 9 is 12.
12.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And how, I can see that's, manifestation on all levels.
On all levels.
Okay, got it.
The Trinity, 3 times 3. The Trinity on all three levels, active in the presence of God, 0. Okay, magnified, because that is the spiritual level. Okay, so here's the symbol. That's the symbol of the siege. And then he says that you're going to eat this and this and this. And this was actually the food that they ate in the exile. A certain amount of water, a certain amount of food. And the people of Israel shall eat their bread unclean among the nations, whither I shall drive them. And then we have the symbol of Jerusalem's fate. And he is told to shave his head and cut off his hair. And you remember that hair was believed to be the symbol of strength. In Judaism, it is always a sign of mourning and sadness. People cut their hair when they're in mourning, and then he's to scatter it in various places, and then sew a few strands on his robe. This is an elaborate ritual, but as a symbol of, of Jerusalem's loss of strength and the mourning that will take place as a result of this siege. Okay, so we've covered quite a bit here. It is 7 minutes past. 816-301-6304. If you haven't already read it, please do read at least chapters 1 through 4, which is about Ezekiel's call and his commission, and what a dramatic reversal it was from everything that he had believed to what his new role he perceives to be. Amazing.
I find it a little the imagery to be really overpowering, hard, thick. I mean, like you could take one. I mean, I guess I can do it phrase at a time, but then integrating it seems very confusing.
Okay, so the comment was that she finds the imagery a bit dense and hard to integrate into a whole. If you start with the cosmic level of the wheel within the wheel, the individual moves along with the cosmos, as in the divine, so as above, so below. A basic spiritual law. And you go straight, and this is such an amazing concept that even when there appears to be a setback, and the exile, to many of them that appeared that there were many who was sure that God was punishing them for that. And so even when there appears to be a setback, you are actually going straight, because without that setback, there would not be the renewal that was able to take place. The phoenix cannot arise from the ashes until the destruction takes place. So just like purification has to take place with healing, so too purification has to take place in Jerusalem, and this exile has to take place so you can hit rock bottom and know what it's like to live without the presence of God. It's like living all bound up like this, and Ezekiel is there to demonstrate it, being bound up in cords, and it is definitely the most visual and the most dramatic of any of the prophets that I have read so far.
And
but
this revelation of the dirt too. I think it's just,
yes.
It's just wow.
And also this sort of emphasized point about personal responsibility. Jeremiah had that as well, because Jeremiah said that he had a covenant with God, the fifth covenant of the Old Testament, that upon their hearts I will write the law. So, they couldn't obey the outer laws. Nobody can obey outer laws. But if the law is written within your heart, then everyone has access to that. And we have the choice to go there and to make different choices based on a different state of consciousness. And so we are all personally responsible. It used to be Israel. It was all about Israel had, worshiped the foreign gods. Well, what is Israel? Israel is a community of individuals who have collectively violated spiritual law. It's just like saying, I'm not responsible because my parents were this way. Okay. Oh, I just inherited these bad habits from my family. Oh, sorry, that doesn't fly anymore. We are each responsible for our own spiritual growth. Okay, I know that there are at least 4 people who are tuned in. 816-301-6304. Would love to hear from you. Any comments or questions? Anything about the handouts? I will, what did I do with it? I guess I didn't bring them. Never mind. Next week we're going to go on because we follow this pattern. First there will be a vision, then there will be the oracle, and then we will have a demonstration. He goes through these demonstrations so that people get a very concrete idea of what it looks like, what it feels like.
So the binding is one of the...
Binding is key, because then you get this sense of what it feels like to be bound in an outer way. Okay, as a result, you have these restrictions on your activity as a result of believing the illusion that you are separate from God and living as though you were in a state of separation. So this is not about a period of history. This is very much a part of us. It reminds me of, when we went to Toronto and saw Hamlet. The choreographers and the people who made the costumes and all of that wanted to be sure we didn't get the notion that Hamlet was simply a piece of literature written in the 1600s by Shakespeare in this Elizabethan age. But this was a modern phenomenon and demonstrated that. And so you could watch that throughout the play. The king had a dramatic change of clothing from Elizabethan to modern to demonstrate that exactly the same pattern is prevalent today. And that something is indeed rotten in the state of Denmark, but Denmark representing the consciousness of whatever particular community you happen to be in. 816-301-6304. I'll give you a little preview. So we heard in Isaiah also about the righteous remnant. Bob Conrad. Good evening, Bob. Hi, Bob.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Hello?
Hi. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah, hi, Bob. I'm here.
Yes.
Is your computer turned down?
Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello?
I have to come back. I'm going to have to come back.
Okay, call back. Yeah, it's fully charged.
No, I think it sounded like he was breaking up on his end.
Okay. So, after he receives the instructions to cut off his hair, then here we have okay. Good evening. Hi, Bob. Hi, Bob.
How are you? I was trying to call my cell phone and I was having problems, so I decided to call you on this.
Okay.
I have a question. I'm not sure I'm completely able to formulate my question, but this whole issue of punishment and spiritual law, and can you elaborate on what we mean by spiritual law in relationship to the pattern of punishment that we see throughout the writings, especially in the prophets in the Old Testament?
Yeah, okay. It was, you see, the spiritual law is non-changing. Spiritual law is, it's easy to see it with the law of gravity, that when we violate spiritual law, knowingly or unknowingly, there are consequences. It's not that we are being punished for our sins, but by them. It is simply in the act of violating the law that we have interpreted it as punishment. It's easily corrected. All right. If mathematics is another really easy example. If I say 2 plus 2 is 5, well, that makes then everything that is based upon that error false. But all I have to do is go back and erase the 5 and say, 4. Then everything is corrected. So it's punishment. It's not punishment in the sense that something is being done to us. And Ezekiel points this out, I think, more effectively than any of the other prophets, because he said that even though the challenge is extremely difficult, it's not punishment, because it is pushing us inside to a deeper level of resources so that we can meet this and come out ahead.
Well, I guess where I'm having an issue, and it comes up recently, and I've heard people say, I want no part of the Old Testament because my God is not a punishing God. But my question is, if we were to look this up in the metaphysical dictionary, how would they define spiritual law? If you are not awakened and you're not aware, there's no way you could. So what we're talking about, spiritual law, relates only to those who are aware of God's presence?
No, spiritual law works whether you're aware of God's presence or not. But it is up to you as an individual to discover spiritual law and how it functions. But in order to do that, you have to go to that level of consciousness where the law emerges, which is in the silence at the depth of your being. There, spiritual law emerges from that point. So, go ahead.
So we really can't define spiritual law as such.
No, there are spiritual laws. They're quite precise. And they're non-changing. That's how God functions through law. It's impersonal. It has nothing to do with, God is no respecter of persons. That's why I like to use gravity, because gravity is a law that holds us to the earth. Gravity is the faculty of love that brings everything together. But and everybody knows that if you walk off of a cliff, that it doesn't matter who you are, if you're a king, or if you're a homeless person, or if you are whatever nationality you are. If you walk off of a cliff, gravity is functioning. It's something that is always functioning. That's how the universe stays together. Charles Fillmore says we don't have a tricky God. God functions through unchangeable, eternal laws. But we can never intellectually comprehend these laws, but we can put ourselves in tune with them at the source of our being, and then we spontaneously act in accordance with law. We only tend to understand that we may have violated something by the conditions that we have to face. And the wrong question to ask is, why is this happening to me? The right question, say, is, how can I meet this with the highest spiritual truth that I have? Does that?
But I see where, I think one of the things Bob was talking about is how if you don't interpret it that way, if you interpret it, Ezekiel and everything that's going on there, as not addressing law, but addressing rules.
Okay.
Then
okay.
Then that is what I think keeps some churches from wanting to deal with that whole Old Testament to begin with.
Adine just made this comment that she's distinguishing between rules that a religion has and spiritual law, which are laws that keep the universe functioning and everything in it, including us. And as far as people who refuse to use the Old Testament because it's a punishing God, it is not a punishing God. It's only a punishing God if our understanding of that is literal. But at a certain point we say, oh, yes, I had this challenge. I'm not being punished. I am being called to a far deeper level than I have been called before, so that I can rise in consciousness and be able to meet this. In unity, we say there's no condition, no situation beyond God's ability to heal. So if we say that, then we're going to be tested by situations. And you say, oh, okay, so you believe there's no condition beyond God's ability to heal. Well, let's throw this at you and see what you do with it. Okay? And so when we are able to truly integrate these truths, then we don't have to meet that particular challenge again. But always the purpose of everything is to draw us inward to the source where we have what we need to overcome anything. These are the teachings of Jesus, and Jesus was a Jew, and that was his scripture. So the people who don't read the Old Testament, they're taking the Bible literally, instead of as the evolution of human consciousness is the evolution of the understanding of God in human life.
Well, I guess then I'm just trying to get this clear in my head. We could say then that the law of gravity and the law that 2 plus 2 is 4 and never 5 is a universal law. They're universal laws, correct?
Yes.
And so when several years back, when we had the outset of AIDS, and one of the evangelists said that God was punishing them for their act of sinning as / homosexuality. So that's the tradition of viewing how shall I say it, the law, God's law, and where God is a punishing God, and God punishes if you misbehave, you're going to be punished because God is our parent, and as a parent would punish a child for misbehaving, so God will punish you. And this televangelist believed, and not only that, but in other situations, that we were being punished because of our misbehavior and our misuse of sexuality.
And I say that is a very childish and immature understanding of God. And this same televangelist would probably say, "Oh, I believe in a God of love." Oh, that we're all equal on a spiritual level. It doesn't matter if you have AIDS or if you're healthy or sick or whatever your condition in life is. God doesn't see you as anything but perfection. It's simply our understanding of God as a force of love. God as love. And if you don't have that understanding that God's presence is within you, see, unity is different because we have an understanding that God is not a being outside of ourselves. God does not exist independently of us. It's the wheel within the wheel. God is a power and presence that is God-like, but we have to cultivate an awareness of that until we can bring it forth in a visible way. Our relationship to God is oneness. And if we're not experiencing oneness, we need to do more inner work, going within to the place where the oneness is. That's in the transcendent level. We are one. We are always there in communion with the one power and one presence. And through repeated practice, we become more and more established in that and less incapable, that is, less capable of violating spiritual law. The truth is that we have free and open access to that infinite source of good, right? But that's the law. We have free and open access, each one equally. It doesn't matter if you have lots of money or if you have no money in the bank, or even if you have a bank account, but you still have free and open access to an infinite source of good. Now, if you do not have an experience of that level where that truth is a reality for you, you're not going to believe it, and you're going to act like you have been victim. You are a victim of the economy or the banks that made everybody go bankrupt, or, whatever. We like to blame, and sometimes it's blaming God. I know I have a friend who blames God. I guess she's not a friend anymore, but she used to be. We blame our parents. I heard someone the other day blame their family for a history of mental illness, and I thought, what if Myrtle Fillmore did that? We wouldn't have a unity church. It's not that anyone is to blame, just like Jesus said, who sinned? This man, the blind man, who was blind from birth. Well, when did he sin? And Jesus says, no one sinned, not the man, not his father, but so that the glory of God, those deep inner resources, can come forth. And that is the whole purpose of challenge. And you can go through the whole Bible and see that. And I think Ezekiel does a spectacular job of pointing that out by demonstrating himself what that feels like to be under siege, as it were, from all of these outer conditions that tend to make us feel victimized. Is that helping?
I guess I'm using my linear thinking mind and trying to come up with something that I'm looking at today in today's world, especially the Middle East and what's going on. It seems like that there's probably a very low percentage of people who understand and follow the spiritual law, because even in religions we get into the ego and the one up and the power to be powerful over another person or nation or community.
Right.
And it just came up, and I just needed to.
Yeah, no, it's good, and yes, religion is probably the greatest offender of wrong ideas in the world. But spiritual truth is beyond religion. Religion is not the same as spiritual law. Spiritual law.
That's right. I know that, and I understand that.
And it's just.
Thank you for letting me ventilate and just work this through. It just came up, obviously, for some reason. I appreciate it.
Oh.
And I realize I'm running over time, so I'm going to say goodbye.
Oh, hey, well, thanks for calling. No, I appreciate it. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Oh, no, we did it over time now. It's all right. That's all right. Spiritual truth is true no matter what religion you are. That's why the tradition of knowledge, which is the source of all one-source religions, is a level beyond religion. Religion is about rules and interpretations and history, and religion doesn't help people. Well, I shouldn't say that. Religion probably is a comfort to some people. But it's the experience at the depth of your being. It's your experience of God that determines how you are able to relate to things in the world. And yeah, the Middle East is a mess. And so, yes, there's this great polarization. The government is a mess. That, it does appear that things are falling apart. But just like Ezekiel came to understand, it had to happen so that there could be a renewal, just like Jesus had to be crucified in order for there to be a resurrection. So thank you, Bob, for giving me a chance to preach. I don't often get that. Anything else you want to say, Adine?
No.
Okay, so next week we will continue with the oracles. Up and at a certain point, about chapter 24, Ezekiel's wife dies, and this is a symbol of the siege of Jerusalem. In fact, it's made to coincide. So his wife dies, and then he is told how to meet that challenge and to see the good in all situations. If we don't see the good, but we say everything is good, that is not such a helpful, healthy thing for us to do. It's better to say, I'm not getting this. Anyway, so I'm taking the highest road with the highest truth that I have at my disposal. So anyway, thank you all for listening. And if you're at home and you would like to support New Foundation Unity, I invite you at this time to hold your love offerings in your hands and bless them with the awareness that the source is indeed infinite, that we have free and open access to God's infinite source of good. We give freely and with love, knowing that we cannot outgive God and that already more good is on its way to us. And as we send our gifts forth, we bless them with our offertory statement. Divine love through me blesses and multiplies all the good I give and all the good I receive. And for that, we say thank you and amen. So I'll see you next week. Read some more. You can read the whole thing and pick out the patterns, pick out the images that speak to you. And we will continue. Don't listen to the news too much if it overthrows you. Anyway, so God bless you and good night.